Shelby Oaks is a 2024 American film written and directed by Chris Stuckmann and stars Camille, Sullivan, and Sarah Durn. The plot follows a woman's search for her sister that went missing 12 years prior after new details surface involving her case. So here we are with, in some ways, I would say one of the more anticipated horror films of really the last few years, and honestly, not at all the movie that I've been looking forward to reviewing. I don't mean that in a bad way. Mostly just because I feel like opinions are just going to be all over the place with this film. I'm sure you are aware of who Chris Stuckmann is at this point, and for the most part, I like the guy. I've only really been watching his reviews for maybe 3-4 years, maybe 5 tops, and I know the controversy that surrounds him, but whatever. I think he's a decent guy, and that's all I really have to say about him. A lot of YouTube reviewers are going to be brutally hard on this movie. I can promise you that. To try and take Stuckmann down a peg, especially if they already didn't like him. And if they do like him, I feel like a lot of people are probably going to praise it just a little bit more than they normally would have, maybe even a lot more than they normally would have, just out of loyalty. And I do get that to an extent. Honestly, even before Shelby Oaks released, I was proud of Chris. He was able to secure a deal with Neon, for distribution, and even, had Mike Flanagan sign on as executive producer. Chris is living his dream right now, and, I'm super fucking happy for him. Again, I think he's a good dude. So, a group of paranormal investigators went missing while they were out exploring, an abandoned prison in the fictional ghost town of Shelby Oaks, Ohio. Stuckmann is an Ohio guy, so I actually thought it was super cool and of course fitting for him to use locations, throughout his home state, which is what he did here. And, I imagine he's had ideas with some of these locations, probably going back decades. 12 years later, Mia, played by Camille Sullivan, the older sister of Riley Brennan, one of the missing crew, is being interviewed for a documentary about the disappearance, where she states that she's always believed that Riley is still alive. She just feels it. She tells the host that, when they were kids, Riley, had frequent night terrors and believed that there is something or someone that watches her. Right after the documentary crew leaves, a man with a video cassette tape in his hand knocks on her door and says, "She finally let me go," before shooting himself. Mia calls the police, but she keeps the tape, which is, probably a bold move and probably highly illegal, but she doesn't trust them, to reopen the case, a case that they already had closed, a decade or more prior. So her next move is to go to the locations on the videotape, to see if she can find any clues. I really liked how Stuckmann used, found footage and mockumentary, elements here. I'm a huge fan of those genres, and I know that he is too. So I seem to be reminded of a few things here, and I don't know if it's just me. But I got some True Detective vibes, oddly enough, even if this is not at all a police movie or really a detective movie either. Mia basically is our detective, essentially. But without spoiling too much of there, I think there are some pretty cool, if even vague folk, horror elements at play here, which I'm always a fan of. On that note, though, I do wonder if Stuckmann also took maybe a little bit of influence from the Blair Witch Project. Camille Sullivan gives a really, really solid performance here, too, as the lead. But it does seem like she, kind of has nobody else to bounce that dialogue off. Nobody else really on her same level. But I will give her credit because she really does give it her all here. The other film that kind of came to mind while watching this was Poughkeepsie Tapes. Although more for the mockumentary and found footage elements, not really the serial killer aspect, but I did kind of get some flavors from that movie. Again, could just be me. And I really love a good folk horror story. And again, there are some kind of vague folk horror elements here. And Shelby Oaks, in my opinion, can sit next to Strange Harvest, from this year in some ways, which is cool. I don't think that the folk horror type visuals here are particularly original. But they're charming enough nonetheless. The story itself isn't super original either, but there's enough little personal touches, that keep it interesting enough. I definitely had some issues with this film. I can't get away from that. But most of them kind of stem from the writing. The dialogue is kind of frustrating at times, but it was mostly the pacing of the dialogue that kind of stuck out to me in a negative way. Another problem I had is I also kind of thought that the first two acts would, try to rely on its atmosphere, to set up scares that just ended up kind of falling flat. It's like they would set up these kind of payoffs that just never come, and I found that it got kind of old, and it was kind of disappointing. It had to have happened at least twice, maybe even three times. And even though Stuckmann did keep it tight here, at like an hour and a half, for the runtime, and he clearly knew not to drag this out, it still would have made like a better short film, I think. It's like he was going for Oz Perkins and Robert Eggers kind of styles here, and I'm all for that. I don't think he's ready for something like that just yet. I'm sure you're going to find a lot of reviews, going over things in much more detail than what I did, but I felt like keeping mine simple, I guess. I really do hope, Stuckmann takes this on the chin. I mean, the movie is okay. It's okay. He didn't knock it out of the park on his first try, but he made a movie, and he should be proud of that. Hopefully, he takes his experiences here and comes back, 10 times stronger. So I'm going to give Shelby Oaks a 5 out of 10. Cheers, guys, and I'll see you at the multiplex.